So, what's up? Lost your mind yet? No? All right, cool. Yeah, good. All right, I'm joking, but I'm hanging in there by a thread, I guess. Today I'm feeling pretty good. My work week ended, and I've got a little bit of an extended break, but it isn't always that way, and I'm going to level with you. I've actually been pretty bummed about this whole situation for a while. Really bummed. Kind of just down. But I think the worst part of this whole pandemic, assuming you've not been directly affected by it yourself, is all the complicated psychology that's starting to become a real thing for a lot of people, myself included. And if you haven't noticed, it's been a minute since the last episode. And the last two have both been about COVID-related topics, and I'm proud of them, and hopefully they've helped make a small difference in someone's decision-making. But the constant low-lying threat out there, plus the fact that I've been flying in months, coupled with a really weird work schedule and the lack of social connection with friends and family, really kind of adds up. And I'm sure you're there too, but the thing that really seems to be at the center of all this is that eventually I feel that I kind of lost my creativity for a minute, the drive to make content and become a better pilot and share what I know and learn from others. And when that went, I just really felt down, and I need to concentrate on getting the background stuff right again. But luckily, I found some stuff that really helped, and now I'm feeling a lot better, full of cautious optimism, if you will. And as the weeks have gone by, it turns out I actually like teaching homeschool. Who knew? I don't know if there's a future in it for me, though, but I've never been able to be this involved in my kids' education, which is kind of cool. And I don't think I've ever had this much family time either. And I also don't think I've been out on a bike this much since I was a teenager. Not bad for the biggest reality check of our generation, right? Minus, of course, the looming threat thing. And, not flying. Whatever. This is Podcasting on a Plane. I'm Brandon Gonzalez, and on this show, we tell the stories of aviation, the stories of stuff that underlies all that we do each day as we make our air world work. And I'm glad to have you in the tower with me today at the West Coast during our reduced operating hours, of course, as long as you're wearing a mask. Anyways, this thing rolls on. We're all adapting one way or another, and adaptation is something we're all constantly doing because it seems like the rules keep changing. And for the most part, they're getting lighter, which is nice. But it's hard to keep up sometimes with the constant information changes, what's going on where, what you should and shouldn't be doing as things reopen and all that. But one great resource I found is AOPA. Not really surprising, but they made a webpage devoted entirely to navigating this whole thing. And they talk about regs that have been modified, like grace periods for your currency, plus how that affects your insurance and a ton of other stuff for non-aircraft owners too. There's, of course, a link in the show notes. Make sure to check it out. But maybe the biggest restriction and also bummer that came out of this whole thing is just when I went in to record this, the news of the day was AirVenture this year has officially been canceled. I know, this isn't really brand new news, but I'm still thinking about it because I was looking at my leave calendar for the weeks coming up, and I had that whole week off. It's my birthday week too. It's my favorite week of the year. And unfortunately, even though I got the time off this time, I'm just not going to be able to go. Or any of us for that matter. But AirVenture has been officially canceled, and hopefully next year we'll get that back to normal. I don't really know what to say. I mean, it's the right thing to do for sure, but it really drives home the complete bummer nature of this whole thing, especially as many states are slowly reopening out of the darkest times, bit by bit. For me, though, as we reopen, I'm not going to lie, there's a little fear underlying everything, which is the fear of a surge in cases again, and increased risk for me, my family, my friends, but also a little bit of stress relief that the system can actually handle what happens this time. It's not like last time. And if there were to be a surge, all the individuals out there who have been suffering through this whole time with less than ideal circumstances would probably be given a better chance this time. And hopefully the rest of everyone else who's been suffering will finally be able to get back on their feet. And a while ago, I asked listeners to share what they've been up to during this time, and I think it's time to share what they sent in. First, let's start with some thanks sent by Kate. Kate says, "Hey, I love the most recent episode, number 72. It's been so confusing to hear about so many other states continuing their flight training and flying, and it's so helpful to hear the thought process behind closing down a school. Great episode, thanks." And then she bought me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/Bravo Golf. So Kate, thank you too. Longtime show listener and broadcaster and cool radio voice guy Tom Kane sent in what he's been up to. Let's check that out.
Hey, Brandon. This is Tom at Whiskey 905, Ocracoke Island, North Carolina. Hope you're doing well. So, what's going on? Well, here we kind of got hit with a double whammy. The flood from Hurricane Dorian plus the virus has really got us here. The last of our debris from the flood left the island about a week ago. So that's one step forward. Our school kids really got hit bad. They started school last August, went for about 10 days. Then the flood came. They were off for a month. The school was flooded. So they were split up to 3 different locations around the island. Then the virus came, and now they're all taking school from home. We had some visitors in March. A few businesses were open, and then everything got closed down with the virus. I finally got myself in a position to get some flight time in. It had been a while. So I booked some time with Jenny at OBX Airplanes just to get a little refresher time. And got up there that day, and it was IFR and pouring rain, so no flying. A week later, Kilo Mike, Quebec, India, Dare County Airport, where I fly out of, closed, along with all of the Outer Banks Park Service airports. They're all closed till, as of now, the end of April. So aviation-wise, I've been watching webinars, plus some stuff on YouTube, trying to keep up mentally at least. I've been exercising the brain. And I may never get an instrument rating, but I've been studying the Sporty's instrument online course and the Kirshner instrument book. It's a good education whether I get the rating or not. The other brain exercises I've been doing is something I like to do every few years. This is really off, but I really enjoy reading Einstein's book on relativity and Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time. The stuff about black holes and space-time and the flexibility of time itself just fascinates me. Just watched a program from Nova that's on Amazon Prime right now. It's a 4-part series called The Fabric of the Cosmos. It explains relativity and time in a pretty consumable manner, let me put it that way. So I recommend anybody watch that. It's pretty good. So that's about it. Welcome back to your tower. Hopefully we'll get things going again. I can't wait to get back in the air. Have a great day.
And also, if you listen to this or really any other aviation podcast, you probably know Glenn Towler. He always has an interesting perspective from the other side of the world. Here's what Glenn has to say.
Hey, Brandon, it's Glenn from New Zealand with some feedback that I promised you earlier on before. Yeah, I mean, we're at week just over 2 weeks, so just over halfway through our lockdown. Things are looking pretty good here, I'll be absolutely honest. Yeah, we've got very few cases now of the virus. I know other countries are just, words fail me almost. It's just anyway. We're not going to get political about this. So, I'm very lucky that I listen to podcasts. And I've made a lot of friends through listening to podcasts, especially the Airline Pilot Guide podcast. I mean, and going to Oshkosh and things like that. It's just made my friends list quite long. So, talking to friends has been good. I live on my own, so it's just me. And of course, I'm not ready to go out very far. I've just been out for about an hour on the old cycle. So cycling around the local area, just getting out and getting some fresh air. I mean, it's a great way to waste time. My job, I'm lucky enough I'm still getting paid by my job. I work for what we call Acme Defence. So I'm sure you can. It's one of the biggest defence companies in the world. We do a lot of work for the New Zealand Army. So, we're basically called non-essential workers. Go home, we'll carry on paying you. So I'm like, oh, that's fine by me. Shopping is interesting here. All the shops are closed except the supermarkets and the petrol stations. Oh, and pharmacies. But the thing is, the supermarket is they only let so many people in at a time. The line went outside the door and around the corner, and I was like, I could have been there for like an hour just waiting to get in. So I'm like, nah. We had the hoarding here as well, of course, the toilet paper, the flour and things like that just sold out. It's just nuts. I mean, why these people? There was a guy, it's a funny story, and the guy on the radio ended up with an 18-month supply of toilet paper in his carriage, and you can't get rid of it. However hard he tries, now he's been banned from local shops, and the supermarkets have got so much toilet paper now that we don't know what to do with it all. So I hope you're all staying well. Glenn out.
And last but certainly not least, I need to welcome a generous new patron on Patreon named Brad Mason. We actually met a few months ago at the tower, and when things change, we can't wait to do some flying together in his Cirrus. But Brad, thank you so much, and welcome to the show as a patron. I really appreciate it. A lot of people have been wondering what I've been up to during this time, and There's an AOPA article that I'm going to read that pretty well describes what it's been like for me. The headline is, "The FAA to scale back ATC service as traffic declines. AOPA makes safety recommendations and about 100 facilities may be affected." So this was a little bit before it all happened, but starting in the middle of the article so you understand where I'm coming from, a lot of facilities were subject to reduced operating hours because they just weren't necessary, and so that we can social distance our crews and split things up a little bit differently. No end date was given for the downsizing that will affect ATC facilities in Class Charlie and Delta airspace, where traffic volume has declined as much as 96%. Modifications will be reviewed regularly for an eventual return to normal operations, says Rune Duke, AOPA Senior Director of Airspace, Air Traffic, and Aviation Security. The FAA will conduct a regular analysis of traffic levels to determine how to appropriately staff the facilities. Further in the article, AOPA and other aviation associations have been providing the FAA with feedback on issues to be addressed and to ensure safety with procedural clarity and to maintain efficiency when roughly 100 affected facilities reduce their operating hours. So to make a long story short, traffic is down a lot of places. Actually, not my airport. You might be really surprised. I feel like it's as busy as it's ever been, but that's because we have a lot of large flight schools, and those were considered essential, as we discussed in the last couple episodes, and they're still going great guns. So it is nice. It feels lively, but at the same time, it also makes it kind of busy for me. But our tower is now open from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. I'm on the second crew, which means I work from about 10:15 to 6:15, 5 days a week, and then I'm off for 10. And that's the way we decided would be the best way to social distance the crews so that there's only a few people at the facility at a time, definitely enough to provide proper service, but not so many as to have extra cross-contamination that we don't need to have happen. So it's been kind of nice. I've been enjoying it. And like I say, when I'm home, I've got a lot of neat stuff going on. And when I'm at work, well, it's as busy as ever. So as this thing rolls on, it's been enjoyable, but definitely a whole lot different. So what can you do to keep entertained, current, and I dare say sane as things ever so slowly begin to creep towards whatever the new normal is? Well, for today's topical content, I'm going to be back with a list of resources and recommendations that I'm using to kind of keep it all glued together. But what are the experts saying about the business? Well, on the airline side of things, from Skift, they have an article that says, "Don't count on airlines to fully recover for 3 years," and that's from Delta's CEO. Air travel won't rebound to pre-pandemic levels for another 3 years, Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian warned analysts during the company's first quarter earnings call. Demand for near-term air travel dropped to almost zero in a matter of weeks, he said. But when travel does start to return, Bastian predicts Delta will be a different airline. Quote, "Safety will not be limited to flight safety, but it'll expand to personal safety," Bastian said. "People will pay a premium on service excellence like never before." Flights, which before the pandemic were operating 80 to 90% full, may only be 65 to 70% full. Although Bastian didn't speculate on whether the airfares will rise, he stressed that the airline will be different than it was even 60 days ago and will focus on a premium experience in flight and in airports. Quote, "I firmly believe people will pay for premium service." For now, Delta is attempting to assuage passengers' concerns by blocking middle seats and increasing social distancing at airports and security lines and even at the gates. It's investing heavily in cleaning aircraft with disinfectant, fogging, and more rigorous cabin cleaning, including that of tray tables, seat back pockets, and in-flight entertainment screens. It's too soon to determine if these measures will be permanent, he cautioned, but, quote, "This recovery will take years. We'll spend some time in the future to figure that out," end quote. Like all U.S. airlines, he's seen an astonishing collapse in demand. Bookings in April evaporated, but Delta saw its revenues for the month fall by 90% compared with the same month the year prior. In response, the company had slashed its second quarter schedule by 85%, which translates into 80% fewer domestic flights and 90% fewer international flights for the quarter. Delta predicts domestic demand will return sooner than the international demand, which Bastian says could take, quote, "years to recover." Forward bookings are bumping along the bottom, Bastian said, noting a 95% drop in travel. Quote, "Demand questions are hard to answer because there's just not a lot of data." And for the rest of the article, check the link in the show notes from Skift. A few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to interview a CEO myself. His name's Lidor Riva, and he's the CEO of a company called Imperium Jets. It's a unique travel-based company that I'm going to let him explain. But he says that one of the most democratic things to come out of this whole pandemic is that it might bring private aircraft travel down to a much more accessible place. Imperium Jets. I actually had to look it up, but the word means absolute power. What a perfect name for a jet company. Today we have Lidor Riva, the founder of that company, on the podcast. Lidor, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Brendan.
Well, you've had quite a road to becoming the CEO of this company, several startups, a round in special forces even. We need to hear about your background leading up to this point.
Well, first off, I never thought I'm going to end up in aviation. That was the last thing on my mind. I always saw myself pursuing a military career. And eventually, after 3 years in the Israeli Special Forces and another 3 years in the Israeli government, I decided that I want to try something else. And I moved to the travel industry. And, I just trying to build something that I believe that I wanted. And I always had a passion to travel. I always had a passion for technology, especially B2B businesses. I'm a huge believer in B2B. And I wanted to build something cool. So I started with sharing economy marketplace for the travel industry called Tuki. It's founded in London. And after about 6 months, having inventory and some customers and some traffic, we wanted to launch a new product for business aviation, basically for private jets. We thought that we invaded the wheel and it's going to be fly groups on empty legs in Europe. That was the concept. We didn't know what we were doing. And once we started developing that, we actually saw that there's a huge market for that, especially in the US, and that empty legs flight is actually a real problem. And once we go deeper and deeper into that, we just fell in love with business aviation, and we saw this amazing opportunity of different things that we can do. Ending up building a company, pivoting the first company, focusing on a business aviation service, which is a B2B marketplace for business aviation, specifically designed for travel agencies. And we just build it from there. And now we have 2 offices, one in Israel, one in Los Angeles. We have a team of 10 people, 24/7 service. We even have a co-managed aircraft and a very, very big inventory of providers and aircraft and customers. And we're really happy with what we built.
Wow. Okay. So now tell me then about Imperium Jets at the top of this road right now. What is Imperium Jets? What do you guys do?
So Imperium Jets is a B2B marketplace for business aviation. It's basically allowing travel companies to sell business aviation services. Now, that can be anything from selling a charter flight to a customer, an ambulance, or a cargo flight. We basically accommodate their flight request and make sure that our customers can deal only with their clients and not handling on the back end. So it's a marketplace, it's a tech company, and it's a service company to help our customers.
Okay. So if I wanted to, say, avoid, I don't know, getting the coronavirus and I wanted to go charter a jet, is that something that I could do through you?
Well, not directly. We are solely B2B platform. So we work with travel agents, we work with travel management companies and sites, and etc. We won't work directly with the consumers. However, when we sometimes get requests, we always forward it to our agents, which is our customers, and their customers are always taking care of it in the best way possible.
Okay, sounds good. So maybe you could give us an example of a B2B transaction that you guys would specialize in.
Sure, absolutely. So we addressing travel agencies that have mainly business clientele. We address them and we see if we can add value by open business aviation for them. That means any travel agency that want to start sell charter flights, or any logistic company that want to do cargo or ambulance, etc. Once we see that we can actually contribute value, we go ahead and we open it with a membership account. Now, this membership account helps them to source out of 2,800 different operators and 83,000 different aircraft in order to find the best deal for them. Once end consumer, meaning the passenger, is addressing the travel agency, let's for a flight, the travel agency using our dashboard to source for this flight, we present only direct pricing for operators. We do it very quickly. Within 2 hours, you're going to get a hard quote. And that's it. The agent is going to sell you the price with a markup. And he's going to make sure that you're having the best experience. We are always with our agents in the back end, making sure that everything goes in plan. If there's any issue with the flight, or if there's need any support, we are always with our agents. We have 24/7 teams just for that. And we'll make sure the flight is going to be an amazing experience for your customer.
Okay, so I guess in the current landscape, which unfortunately has been dominated by the coronavirus, this is going to change things in the long term, isn't it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think the coronavirus is really reshaping not just the industry, the whole world, but especially in the travel industry. We're seeing so many things that we never thought we can even imagine. I mean, airlines are closing flights into mainland China. There's over 21 airlines that have closed their flights. Obviously, now the situation has changed, but the effect on the industry is tremendous. I think that even if coronavirus is going to end today, I don't really think that people are going to rush into the airport and start buying flying ticket to have a trip into Thailand. It's going to be a long process. People need to earn trust again in airlines or hotels or in crowded places. So what we see out of it is that business aviation is going to be more and more popular because eventually you do need to travel. You have to travel for business, for work, for family, for different sort of things. You have to travel. And once you have a tool like business aviation that allows you to pick any destination as close as you can to your end goal or your departure location, and you can have this flight by yourself under your own terms, that's an extremely powerful tool. And I believe you're going to see a lot of business aviation demands, especially on smaller aircraft like turboprop, like the King Air, and different on those categories, because those are really more inviting for the public, for the general public.
Sure. Now, do you think that this over time would maybe bring the availability of private aircraft travel sort of down into a less expensive market? I mean, the demand is going to go up, which says that the price would probably go up. But then again, there's going to be so many people that would, or that are eventually going to be forced to travel. Do you think that the long-term implications of this are such that more people will be able to travel privately or fewer?
I 100% believe that business aviation is going to be open to the public. In fact, our mission statement is the company is literally saying, make business aviation open to the public. That's literally our slogan within the company. Because what we see is that eventually it's a very efficient tool. And there's no reason for this tool to be limited just to one part of the population. Yes, it is pricey. And yes, there is this aura around it. But it's still a very efficient tool. And especially with demand going up, I think that a lot of companies will try to undercut them mainstream pricing and go and offer better pricing. What more is that is interesting, especially in the US, is that the FAA just approved Part 380, and this is part basically allowing what we call air taxi, meaning I can sell you seats on business aviation flights. Now, that feature will help a lot of companies and a lot of individuals to purchase a seat via travel agencies or different applications, which is actually something that we are developing to very specific niches within mainly in the US, in order to allow travelers to just book seats on private jet flights rather than chartering the whole aircraft.
Interesting. Okay. And then is that really a cornerstone of your business model at this point moving forward?
Absolutely. It's extremely important, not just for us, obviously, the company, but for the industry. I truly believe that this is the next step that will really help us achieve our mission, which is making business aviation public.
Sure. Now, I noticed that you have a podcast. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
So one of the things that we have in mind creating this podcast is how we can help the charter brokers. In business aviation, we believe that one of the most important part is obviously the operators and the aircraft and the customers, but there's not really a lot of emphasis on the charter broker. And essentially the charter broker is the person that go and get the deal for everyone and accommodate everything and invest so much love, time, and energy just to make sure that this flight's going to execute in the best way possible. So we wanted to create a podcast specifically designed for charter brokers and travel agencies, interviewing different companies and different brokers just to share some advice about how you can become a better broker, how you can serve your customer better, how you can build a better relationship with a provider. And that's the whole idea behind it. And we're really happy that we have more and more listeners, and we are extremely humbled to hear that customers is reaching out to us and say, "Oh, I heard this episode and I really like what this person had to say." That shows us that we are in the right direction.
Cool. And what's the name of your podcast and where can people find it?
It's called the Imperium Jet Podcast.
Awesome. Ludor, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Brandon, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And all the listeners there, have a great day. Thank you.
So, what's it going to look like after all this? Well, according to an article from Barron's, actually pretty good indeed. They write, major airlines will emerge from the economic tailspin in good shape, an analyst says. It's tough to see much upside in airline stocks. Avianca, one of the largest carriers in Latin America, just filed for bankruptcy protection, and of course travel in the U.S. remains down more than 90% from pre-crisis levels. And the economy, well, it seems to be in a tailspin with unemployment surging to depression-era levels. The hope now is that a recovery starts to take hold in 2021, fueled by a reopening of the economy and progress on containing the virus. That would imply that there's some upside in the stocks, though investors may need to sit tight for a while until it materializes. Quote, while the recovery remains hard to forecast, we think it's a case of when, not if, travel demand recovers, Bernstein analyst David Vernon wrote in a note. When it does, the airline industry will come into the next recovery with higher debt levels, but lower capital requirements, leaving a path for equity to appreciate, end quote. Vernon cut his price targets and slashed earnings estimates on the big four U.S. carriers, Delta, United, American, and Southwest. He maintained outperform ratings on Delta, United, and American and held Southwest at neutral. Delta has the most upside for this model, with potential to gain 77% from current prices. The crux of Vernon's argument is that airlines have mostly raised enough cash and liquidity to make it through the crisis, avoiding a scenario of operating under bankruptcy protection. While they've amassed more debt and diluted their equity through issuing additional shares and granting warrants to the U.S. Treasury, their capital requirements and cost structures will be lower next year. This should set the stage for equities to gain value as travel rebounds. The big unknown is the shape of the recovery. Vernon sees it happening in two stages. Phase 1 is from crisis levels, where we are now with demand down more than 90%, to a recession-era level. That could start to occur in late 2020 as demand picks up with the reopening of the economy and easing of travel restrictions between countries. Demand could bounce back to 40% of pre-crisis levels in that scenario. Still bad, but more sustainable than the current situation. The second phase he sees is from recession to recovery. Under that scenario, demand recovers to 50% to 60% of pre-crisis levels. When that happens, will hinge on the trajectory of the virus spreading, whether there are additional outbreaks in the fall and winter, and progress on developing and distributing a vaccine. Optimistically, air travel would rebound 50 to 60% of pre-crisis levels by the first quarter of 2021. But in a more pessimistic outlook, Vernon sees travel rebounding to those levels in the third quarter of 2021. As for stocks, he sees the biggest gains for Delta. The airline has stockpiled enough cash and liquidity to avoid another round of loan financing from the government, which would further dilute its equity. He sees Delta maintaining some of the highest industry margins, quote, given its execution ability and brand value, end quote. Though Delta also has some of the highest capital spending requirements given its relatively old fleet, he wrote, he has a price target of $39 on the stock, up from recent prices of around $22, implying a 77% return. Vernon sees scant upside in American, giving it a price target of $10, up from recent prices of around $9.60. The airline will likely receive more than $4 billion in loans from the government on top of the grants and loans it's already taken that'll further dilute its equity. But American has the newest fleet of the major carriers, limiting its capital requirements, and it'll be borrowing from the government at below market rates because private financing probably isn't available. United's likely to see equity dilution from taking government grants, Vernon wrote. He sees a bit more upside in the stock. His price target is $30, up from recent prices of around $23. As for Southwest, it has some of the highest industry margins, but it'll have steeper capital spending as it upgrades its fleet with 737 MAX planes on order. Quote, the company has the healthiest balance sheet among the four, and equity dilution risk is already baked in, Vernon said. Nonetheless, he has a $29 price target, up only slightly from recent levels of about $26. Again, that article from Barron's by Darren Fonda. All right, well, back to our little world here. As promised, I'm going to give you a list of some of the best resources I found out there for just about anyone looking to get, or better yet, keep it together until things return to normal. And the first one is that the Kalamazoo Air Zoo is doing what's called a Launchpad to Learning page, which they have daily lessons and educational content, most of it aviation related, for anyone to enjoy. But as children get out of school and summer comes and there's not a lot of camps and things available, it could be a really, really good page for families to have their children look at the projects and STEM-related concepts, mostly in aviation, that could kind of, help keep things busy over the summer, if you know what I mean. There's a link in the show notes, and it's a great virtual classroom for STEM-minded people from one of the finest aviation museums around. AOPA has a bunch of Rusty pilot seminars available online. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. And they're doing a listing of restrictions state by state, so for the latest, also be sure to click on the link in the show notes for that too. 4Flight's churning out seminars. They do great stuff, and you can learn more about the apps or anything else. Just check out the page. Aerotime compiled a great list of aviation movies for you to watch, which is kind of fun. Make sure you check out a link in there because there's a couple that'll kind of surprise you, but they're all really good. And as for yourself, I think this is probably the best time there'll ever be to get as active and fit as possible. Show patrons already know that I'm an avid cyclist, and I've been out almost every day in my hometown just north of San Diego, riding like crazy along a route I've made that's pretty much as socially distanced as possible. And the time came that I actually needed a new bike, and I ordered it, and it came overnight. But if there's a little piece of exercise or recreation equipment that you've had your eyes on, well, now might really be the time. And to round out the personal growth part of things here, make sure you can go back and check out episode number 70 with wellness expert Lance Breger. Interesting because that came right before all the pandemic stuff happened. But I kind of opened up a little bit about how I do things and what I do, and it was kind of neat. Hopefully you can go back and get something out of that. But if you're looking for some pre-made places to start getting your personal shiz together, I can tell you what's worked for me and what I do. And while every person, of course, is different, maybe you'll do some of the research and end up liking the same stuff that I do. So if you're looking to get your diet in order, I like Dave Asprey and the whole Bulletproof plan. For mind-body stuff, breath work, cold exposure, mental control, I've been a fan of Wim Hof, the Iceman, and his method for a few years. And they're actually running a 50% off special on everything right now. But they have a ton of free content too. And if you can't afford even the discounted price, I think they're willing to make a deal with just about anybody for whatever you can afford, which I think is pretty cool. And of course, I don't know this for certain, but usually when someone says that, they'll probably do it for free. And anybody who's willing to do that in a time like this because they believe so deeply that what they're offering might change or save someone's life is all right in my book. So go check out Wim via the link in the show notes. Keeping yourself mentally in the game as far as flying is concerned, if you still can't go back to doing that yet, I like that the IMC Club's moving into doing online meetings, and my next chapter meeting is coming up pretty soon, and I'm excited about it. They have a special guest available, and they've done a lot of pre-made content, I think via Bold Method, which is really nice, because if you can't get your heads actually up in the clouds, well, at least you can kind of stay in the game on the ground a little bit better too, IMC-wise. And if you're stuck somewhere and all you've got's a phone, well, don't forget about the 10% off discount with Plain English, the ATC communication simulation app. Just enter the code DELTA, D-E-L-T-A, just like the airline. No affiliation, of course. And you'll be on your way to leveling up your comm game, even when you're not in the cockpit. And last but certainly not least, I was looking for some escapism the other day, let's be honest, and I ran across an absolutely amazing video on YouTube. On one hand, it's just a passenger view of what I'm 99% sure is an ERJ approaching LaGuardia. Big deal, right? But on the other hand, it struck a chord with me. It's a spectacular circling visual approach right over the Manhattan skyline, the Bronx and Queens, right into the epicenter of what this horrible pandemic was in the USA, but right from before the horror. And it took me back to a time when I experienced a similar approach into JFK as a passenger before my aviation career started, and before I was sitting here wishing that I could do the same thing all over again right now. And just like all the rest, the link is in the show notes. I hope it provides you with the same 5 minutes of simple joy that it did for me. Podcasting on a Plane's listener supported. And to find out how you can support the show, go to podcastingonaplane.com. That's all for now. If frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his, and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.